Hey everyone, Professor H here. We're going to take a look tonight at Chapter 8, Physical Development in Adolescence. So this is the first section of Chapter 8. So we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Maybe. Okay. All right. So here we have our lovely opening screen here. It shows a group of adolescents. So we have a bunch of teenagers right here on our cover. Kind of gives us a wide view of some of the emotional stuff just by looking at these photos. All right, so adolescence is a period of time when the child is transitioning to adulthood. So adolescence is a cultural construct, which is a developmental transition between childhood and adulthood. And this period of adolescence is viewed differently based on different cultures. During adolescence, puberty occurs. Puberty is a physical transition to adulthood. It is a universal thing that happens throughout all cultures, and all human beings experience puberty. The word puberty comes from the Latin word pubes, which is to grow hair or to grow hairy. And that's kind of interesting because that's part of the secondary characteristics of reaching maturity is to grow hair in certain areas of the body that were not growing hair previously. Puberty also has a number of hormonal changes which affect physical development as well as emotional and social relationships. You have a lot of ups and downs with emotions and quick changes between different emotional states during this period. As mentioned a moment ago, body growth and sexual maturation is the goal of puberty. First, we'll talk about adolescence in developed countries. So puberty starts on average around 10 or 11 years old. However, the basic processes begin a little bit earlier, by around 8 years old or so. The body is already starting to prepare for puberty. It's already starting to get the systems warmed up for the developmental changes that are going to occur. During this period of time, when they're about 10 or 11 years old, they're spending a lot of time at school with their peers. In the Western countries and the developed countries, their leisure time is usually spent with same age friends or their boyfriends or girlfriends, their little romantic partners at that time. And during this period of time, during adolescence, there's a high media use. Music is by far the most popular form of media use. Social media and television follow those. In developing countries, the period of adolescence might be viewed a little bit differently. For our adolescent youths in these countries, time is often spent with family or working. Children, by the time they reach adolescence, are fairly mature physically, and they are able to contribute to the family income. And so once again, they are either spending time working or with families. Going to school is something that has become more and more popular for developing countries. We see a lot more children attending school. However, it is not universal when it comes to adolescence. Education above the grade of like 6 is kind of something that we mostly see in the developed countries. So for girls, traditionally, time in these traditional or developing countries, time is spent with their mother and other adult women. They are learning the knowledge and skills that they will need in order to fulfill their role as women within their culture. Boys, on the other hand, spend time with adult men, and they learn the skills that they need to be successful within their culture, whether that's hunting, fishing, whatever type of skills are important to that particular culture. Some go to school. In a lot of cultures, boys are more likely to go to school than girls. And the boys during adolescence will begin taking on a lot more roles, working towards their adult roles in the culture as well. Oops. Uh-oh. Got a little problem here with my PowerPoint. Okay, let me get this legged up here. I did not change everything. Okay, so basically, when we talk about the hormonal changes that take place during puberty, we mainly are looking at androgens and estrogens. Androgens are what we would consider to be the male, primarily male hormones, and estrogens are the primarily female hormones. Now, boys and girls both have androgens and estrogens. However, during puberty, we see a spike in, help me guys, hey, I'm having a dog problem. Sorry about that. I had to stop. I'm going to have like a dog fight in my living room while I'm doing this video. Sorry about that. So once again, the testosterone is the most important male androgen. Boys already start off with just a little bit more of the testosterone than girls. However, during puberty, boys increase their testosterone level by 20 times higher than the males. Thank you. My daughter's dog is being a pain. All right. The females actually do have an increase in testosterone also, but it is only like twice as much as they had prior to puberty taking place, or the beginning of puberty. Estrogen, on the other hand, girls will have an 8-time higher level of estrogens than they had prior to puberty. Boys have like a 2 times higher level of estrogen. So it's not a significant increase. I mean, it's not a very large increase of estrogen in males. So androgens are the male hormones. Testosterone is our most important male hormone, and it is released by the testes. It increases genital development, or it gets things rolling so that the penis will develop larger. The testes finish development. It increases muscle growth, body and facial hair, gains in muscle and body size, and in a boy, also a voice change. The estrogen, which would be considered the feminizing hormone, estradiol is one of the more important of the estrogens. It is released by the ovaries, and it supports the development of the genitals. The important area, it also improves, I'm sorry, whew, deep breath, okay. It also is important for developing the uterus, all right? This type of hormonal trigger is it actually has to have a certain amount of fat. So basically the female has to have a certain amount of body fat, we got past that, in order to start this cycle going. If the female does not have enough body fat, it can affect the puberty. It can affect the onset of menstruation and such as well. So in order for all of this to kind of take place in the females, you have to have a certain amount of fat. And then throughout the pubertal process for females, the female will have an increased amount of body fat compared to males. And that could have to do with needing that extra body fat in order to be able to produce a child later. All right, women also, or females, will also have increased amount of body hair, the armpits, pubic hairs, that type of thing. These estrogens are going to regulate the menstrual cycle so that it's on a regular 28-day cycle. Females also have vocal changes, but they are less distinctive than males. They'll also have increases in body size as well, height and weight as well. Okay, so this slide talks about the adolescent growth spurt. So during adolescence, we often see, well, what we do see is a growth spurt, which is a rapid gain in height and weight. It is the first outward sign of puberty. So there's been stuff going on kind of under the surface at the hormone level prior to the time that we see the first outward signs, which are the rapid gain in height and weight. Interestingly, when you look at boys particularly, this occurs in girls, but with boys, oftentimes a boy in adolescence you'll notice that they seem to have like really big hands, really big feet. They kind of have a big nose and big ears because these areas have a tendency to grow more rapidly, more quickly. So they have kind of that gawky look to them. Girls on average begin this growth spurt approximately 2 years prior, 2 years earlier than boys. So on this graph, you can see a peak right here in this growth spurt. They started their growth spurt about 8 years old and then started getting, they increased rapidly. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of kids that are a lot taller, these middle school kids. A lot of times the females are a lot taller than the males, but then when you get around to high school and in adolescence, the boys catch up and surpass them. And oftentimes at that point, you're going to see a lot of taller and bigger boys that are taller than the girls. There are 2 types of sex characteristics. There are primary and secondary sex characteristics. Primary sex characteristics only apply to the organs necessary for reproductions. In the male, that's the penis and testes, and in the female, that's the ovaries and uterus. Those are the only things they really need for reproduction. A secondary sex characteristics are all the other physiological signs of sexual maturity. For example, breast development in a female is a secondary sex characteristic. Pubic hair, voice changes, all of these other things are secondary sexual characteristics. They're secondary signs of sexual maturity. There are 2 events that occur when we talk about sexual maturity. For a female, it is the, my house is crazy, menarche. It's the first menstruation. So that's their first and initial menstruation. And for the males, it's their first ejaculation. Oftentimes the male would have their first ejaculation. It could be while they're sleeping. It can be under a lot of different circumstances that can occur. For the female, the first menstruation, usually the female will have to get out there and talk to somebody about this. It's like, oh no, I need some feminine products. How do I manage this menstruation? What do I do? So usually they are in a situation where they have to talk to somebody about this, and it is an outward kind of social thing that has to be addressed and acknowledged. For the males, that first ejaculation is not something that they go talk to their dad about or their mom about or someone else about. It's usually something that happens and they're just like, what just happened? And they don't seem to have that same social discussion about that portion of sexual maturity as the females do. This is a little chart about sexual maturation in girls. Here we have the characteristics: breast growth, height spurt, pubic hair, first menstruation, and adult height reached. So these are some average ages when these things may occur. So we have an age range of 8 to 13 for breast growth, and we do see some patterns with this. Interestingly, with African American females, they have a tendency to start with their breast growth earlier and their pubic hair earlier than white girls, and Asian girls tend to be later. And in some Asian cultures, we see females developing their breast buds before they are even developing the pubic hair or armpit hair. All right. Next one. Okay, this is sexual maturation in boys. Pubic hair, height spurt, first ejaculation, facial hair, voice deepening, and adult height reached. So once again, there's an age range. So we have anywhere from 10 years old, where it pretty much starts all of this process, and then 17 and a half is kind of the end here. All right, or not the end, but that's an average. It's kind of an average age range. And it can be earlier or later as well. There are cultural differences in puberty. I already sort of mentioned some of those. In most cultures, females show signs of puberty before males do. However, in one culture that we know of in Africa, the Kikuyu culture, Boys show their signs of puberty before females, and they do their height, their growth spurt before females also. Chinese girls develop pubic hair before breast buds, which is the opposite of the Western pattern. African American girls develop breast buds and pubic hairs earlier than white girls. All right, so the next slide here is talking about secular trends in first menstruation. So if you look at the lines, and we look back here to 1830, 1850, 1890, we'll notice a downward trend. So the girls were starting menstruation between 17 and 18 years in some of these countries, and the different countries are represented by these different lines, but we're just kind of looking at the overall trend. And we can see that that trend has gone downward and kind of leveled off somewhere in the 90s here. Part of the reason that this may occur is it is important for a female to have a certain amount of body fat in order for menstruation to begin. In the 1830s through, all of these 1800s, nutrition and the ability to have enough fat in their diet to start menstruation may have occurred at a later time, since food was a little bit harder to come by. Whereas now, we get way too many calories and way too much fat in our diet, which could contribute to this trend that we're seeing now of menstruation starting earlier and earlier and earlier for girls. There are individual differences in the timing of puberty. What that means is, gee, at what age are you going through this process of puberty? Heredity is your most reliable indicator. So basically, at whatever age your mom started her period, or whatever age your dad had his growth spurt, those are the type of things you look at to make a pretty good estimate as to when these things will occur for you. Nutrition and exercise play a great deal in timing of puberty, especially in females, because if a female is a very lean athlete, has very low body fat, they're not going to start their period as early, because you have to have that certain level of body fat. Girls that are really intense athletes may actually start their periods and then not have their periods. They can stop having their periods if they are too lean and do not have enough body fat. Geographic location, there's some research that shows that sunnier areas actually have lower ages of females reaching puberty and starting their menstruation. Socioeconomic status, there's some interesting stuff about socioeconomic status. And basically the research was showing that people from lower socioeconomic statuses actually had earlier timing of puberty. There's a whole bunch about that, but I'm not going to get into that. We already talked about the ethnic groups and early family experiences. There was some other research that was talking about trauma can actually have an impact on starting the timing of puberty happening earlier. And then we already talked about secular trends. All right, so back to the timing of puberty, physical attractiveness and body image is an important thing. So I talked about how when boys are starting to go through puberty, oftentimes they have big hands, big feet, kind of big nose, they have kind of an awkward look to them, which makes them feel less physically attractive and could have a negative impact on their body image. For girls, when puberty starts, oftentimes the female will be putting on more weight because the body will start storing fat better, and they will have a tendency to be larger or get bigger and taller as well. Girls, especially in Western cultures, want to be thinner and smaller. So sometimes if they are starting this process earlier than other girls, it can be problematic for them and it can have negative impact on their body image. Boys, on the other hand, if they go through earlier puberty, and they get that extra size and such earlier on, that is related more to positive things. And because boys want to be bigger and stronger, and that is kind of a societal thing. And they want to be able to fit in with their peers. So they want to have a similar level of physical maturity as their friends. So having early or late maturation can be problematic. With girls, if they have early maturation, so, you know, they're the only ones starting to get breasts, they're the only ones getting taller than the rest of their friends, and their body's changing, and their other friends are still thin and small, it can cause problems with mood, depression, negative body image, and may even start the beginnings of eating disorders, where they want to quit eating so that they're not gaining weight and getting bigger. Boys have a tendency to have a favorable body image with early maturation, higher popularity. However, it can also lead to earlier delinquency, because these boys might hang out with older boys that can kind of get them into trouble, because even though their bodies may be more mature, their minds are still developing. Later maturation may be more negative for boys and has fewer problems for girls. So with girls, another risk factor with early maturation is that when the girls look a certain way at a certain age, other boys are going to think that they're older, and they're going to start getting attention from older boys and older kids. And sometimes, once again, maybe drawn into groups that are older than them, where they are not psychologically ready for that type of thing. And with boys, the later maturation can be more negative because of the desired body type of being bigger and stronger. All right. Cultural differences in ideas regarding puberty. So girls, in a lot of culture, when they start menstruating, they are put off somewhere. They're supposed to go stay at the edge of town in a particular place that has been predetermined for somebody who is menstruating or somebody who is giving birth or recovering from childbirth, because menstrual blood is thought to be considered dangerous to crops, livestock, and people. There's a lot of like superstitions involved with all of that a lot of cultures believe in. So in certain cultures, it's not okay for a female to cook meals during their menstrual cycle or be near other people. So that's just one of the ideas regarding that. For boys, since they don't have like a definitive marker, like a girl starts their menstrual cycle, so they are deemed a woman at that point, and then they go through whatever rituals are within that culture for them. Boys, on the other hand, don't have that specific biological marker. However, within certain cultures, especially traditional cultures, boys may be required to show feats of courage, strength, or pain endurance in order to prove their manlyhood. There are, if on this week's discussion, you'll see a couple of puberty rituals. They've been linked to this PowerPoint as well. So you can click on that when you're on Canvas and watch those videos again if you want. And it shows different puberty rituals. In one of the rituals, in one of the cultures, boys are gathered together. They are taught by the elders of their community. They are basically instructed in the ways of how to become a man within that culture, what it means to be a man within that culture. And then they are circumcised. And they are circumcised, and they are not supposed to show any wincing or pain or anything during that process. So that's just one of the rituals. And once again, it involves circumcision. Females, in a lot of cultures, a lot of African cultures, I don't have the statistics right here with me, but a huge number of African cultures and Egypt and some of the other places believe in female circumcision. And female circumcision is done to the genitalia of a female. There are a lot of negative repercussions that can come from this. Oftentimes women who have that type of circumcision done experience painful urination forever. It can cause problems with childbirth and other issues. However, within those cultures, that is the only way to make a female acceptable for marriage. A lot of international groups have stepped up and deemed female circumcision as female genital mutilation. And there are a lot of efforts out to stop this practice. But once again, that is a cultural practice that is performed. These are the two puberty rituals that you'll be watching for your discussion for this week. All right. If you remember in our earlier lectures, back in early development, we had a big period of exuberance and synaptic pruning. In other words, suddenly there's a whole lot of synaptogenesis occurring where we are having a great deal of connections being formed. So we have a bunch of connections being formed, and ones that we're not using are being pruned back. This happens again in adolescence. Myelination encourages efficiency in thought. So there are several areas of the brain that are still being myelinated during the adolescent period. This myelination improves the efficiency of how the neurons in the brain work. The cerebellum is continuing to grow, and we know now that the cerebellum is not just important in things like balance and motor movements. We know now that the cerebellum also plays a function in mathematics, music, decision-making, social skills, and understanding humor. And during adolescence, we have a great deal of myelination occurring in the cerebellum. All right, health concerns for adolescence. I mentioned earlier that these body changes can often be very alarming to the child who is experiencing them. So two major health disorders that are two major eating disorders that we see are anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. Actually, the DSM-5 has now, I should have updated the slide, has a binge eating disorder. Anorexia is an intense fear of weight gain. So somebody who is suffering from anorexia nervosa is going to think that they are very fat. They would look in the mirror and they can be practically a skeleton. They can be super, super thin, but what they see in the mirror is a fat person. Even though they are not fat, that is what they see. They have a disrupted body image, disturbed. I don't know why it says disturbed. That's just a typo on my part. But so they have a body image that is distorted, and it should say distorted body image. It is a very dangerous condition, and the person drops down to less than 85% of normal body weight. And I believe my next slide talks about treatment of these disorders, I hope. Bulimia is basically a binge and purge cycle that occurs. It is also out of control. What happens is a person may refrain from eating for a while and then binge. And then they'll eat like, a whole bag of chips, a whole bag of Oreos. And we all do that at some point in time probably, but this is a cycle that reoccurs where they have binge eating, where they just eat a ton of stuff and then they try to purge. So the person who is suffering from this disorder is going to try to throw up. That's the most common way of purging. Some people use laxatives, but most people do some throwing up. And it is another way to control that weight. In both of these conditions, the person often has anxiety, depression that goes along with these things. They have poor and distorted body image. Oftentimes, the person with the binge eating disorder or bulimia is going to have a normal body weight, but the person with anorexia is going to be emaciated looking. Okay, treatment options for these disorders. There is hospitalization, medication, and psychotherapy, and all three of these usually work hand in hand. Hospitalization is very important, especially for somebody with anorexia, because it is the most deadly psychological disorder. The effectiveness of these treatments, 1/3 of individuals treated for anorexia remain ill. 1/2 of the individuals treated for bulimia relapse. And people with these disorder have continuing problems as the individuals dealing with these disorders age. So it's something that they will pretty much constantly have to fight with. What's not on here is 10% of people with anorexia die, and they basically starve to death. Their heart will give out. Excuse me, most of the time it's like a cardiac arrest that gets them. So it's a very, very dangerous illness. Substance use is something that we also see a bit of during adolescence. It is rare before adolescence, but it is common by the end of adolescence. So substance use can be anything like smoking, drinking, use of marijuana. Rates of marijuana use by seniors is higher than cigarettes these days. Substance use is higher in Native Americans and lowest in African Americans and Asian Americans. So it's like the Native Americans and the, I believe, white and Hispanic, and then African American and Asians. Teenage substance use has gone down in recent times when compared to like the 80s. So it kind of started trending down in the 90s. There are different categories. We have kind of broke down the reasons for substance use into 4 different categories. So here are the categories. The first one is experimental. Basically, you're just curious, want to try it a few times. Maybe you check it out and you're like, maybe that's not really for me. And that's just experimental. Social, meaning that you only smoke pot when you're with friends, you only drink when you're with friends, but you don't do it any other time. So that's just a social substance use. Medicinal substance use is self-medication. So oftentimes, if somebody in adolescence is dealing with anxiety, stress, sadness, and is having difficulty dealing with their emotions, they may turn to substance use as a form of self-medication to help them kind of deal with those things. So that's medicinal or self-medication. And then we have addictive substance use. If somebody repeatedly uses certain substances like speed, excuse me, cocaine, opioids, that type of thing, they can become addicted to this substance. That means that they depend on taking the substance in order to feel physically and psychologically okay. When somebody becomes addicted to a substance, there are some type of withdrawal symptoms that occur if they try to stop taking the drug. Oftentimes, if they stop taking the drug, it can lead to anxiety, tremors, feeling sick, feeling painful. Depending on what drug you're taking, it would depend on what withdrawal symptoms you end up having. We're not going to get into all that right now. There is psychological dependence and there is physiological dependence. And the withdrawal symptoms have to do with the physiological or physical dependence on a substance, which makes it an addictive substance. All right, that's it. That's all I got for you in this one. So guys, don't forget that you can send me your questions or comments, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you and take care.